Oh, yeah.
Welcome, everybody. My name is Mina Jane, and I am so excited to be here for our Latina Heritage panel with these wonderful authors who I will introduce in just a second. But before we get to that, I just want to say a few things. One is that I'd like to thank the Friends of the Ashland Library for supporting all of our programming. We couldn't do this without them. You can buy signed books from Bank Square Books from any of our authors, and I will put the link in the chat for that, and you can order it anytime, because I think, signed books are gold. Also, we partnered with a bunch of libraries to bring this program to you tonight, and those libraries are Bellingham, Canton, Danvers, Dedham, Lexington, Maynard, Norwood, Somerville, Tewksbury, Watertown, Wayland, and Westboro. As I always tell people, I think that when libraries work together, we can make magic. And obviously tonight is a perfect example of that. Let's see, what else do I have to tell you? Yes, we are going to take questions from the audience. If you have questions, put them in the Q&A. If you have chat, comments, any kind of tech issues, please put them in the chat and I will be paying attention to that. So without too much further ado, let me introduce our wonderful panelists. First of all, Isabel Cañas.
Cañas.
Okay, I want to make sure I'm saying things correctly today. Well, on always. I'm not going to say too much about you, except that you write speculative fiction, which is so interesting, and that you have lived in Mexico, Scotland, Egypt, and Turkey. I want to hear all about your travels. Romina Garber is a New York Times and international best-selling author, and she has been writing since she was 16. For college she started, and she's been writing ever since, which I think is amazing. Priscilla Oliveras is a faculty member teaching classes on romance writing, which I think is also amazing because I feel like we've made it. Us romance readers have made it. Caridad Piñeiro is a transplanted Long Island girl who has fallen in love with the Jersey Shore. She is the founding member of Liberty States Fiction Writers and has presented workshops all over, which is so interesting because she takes the knowledge that she has and she teaches it to others. And I think that's phenomenal. So welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having us.
So I'm going to start off with a quick question and get us started. So I would like to know if you could just tell us a little bit about your own heritage, your own Hispanic heritage, and we will talk about nomenclature in a little bit. So I'm going to start with Caridad.
Well, hi, and welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I was actually born in Havana, Cuba, and my parents and the rest of the family came here during the Cuban diaspora of the 60s. I did grow up on Long Island in Levittown, which was a very unique experience since it was the nation's first planned development. And I started writing in the 5th grade and kept on going all the way through college and law school. And I was lucky enough to have my first book published in 1999 when it helped launch the nation's first Latino romance line, Encanto, which lasted for about 2 years. And, I've been writing ever since. I'm a New York Times and USA Today bestseller with 1 million books sold. And I try to always include different aspects of not only my Cuban culture, but I've been very lucky to spend a great deal of time in Mexico when I was there on business. So I've written stories that incorporate aspects of Mexican culture as well. And for me, it's just, so important for me to show that culture. And my latest book, which is I'm going to show you, is The Family She Never Met, actually has a lot of real life stories about what my Cuban family experienced when we came here from Cuba and the sense of abandonment and change that came to us in this new country, which was very welcoming. But despite that, there was still trauma from having to leave the country where we were born and where we had expected to live the rest of our lives. And so I've had a very unique experience in that, even though I'm not even first generation, I've also basically grown up in very Anglo, I guess, or you would say neighborhoods where, I think people call it code switching, where, I was one person outside the door. In fact, my nickname is Charity, and a lot of people call me that. And then I became Cari or Caridad in the moment that door closed inside the house. It was a very different culture, just separated by that door. And that's been my experience. And I try to reflect that in what I write.
Thank you.
Nice.
Isabel.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I'm a debut author, so not a million copies sold yet. We've just started this journey. My debut novel, which is Gothic horror, is called The Hacienda. It just came out in May. I'm Mexican-American. This book is set in Mexico, and my mother's family has lived in South Texas in the Valley. My mom recently told me since at least 1821. So we were, the Cañas part of my family was in Texas before it was Texas. And so often when people ask me, oh, when did your family come to this country? Because it's a common question that I think people of Latin American heritage get. I say, well, when did this country come to us is perhaps the correct question to ask. And that's actually the topic of my next novel, which I am so not allowed to talk about. Due to my publisher.
What a tease. What a tease.
I know. So for me, growing up Mexican-American, my dad is white, but I always, when I was really young, we lived in Mexico City, and I learned how to read and write in Spanish, and I've always connected very deeply with my mother's family. And I have never felt any ambiguity about the fact that I am Mexican-American. And I often felt a great deal of, not ostracization, but othering when I was growing up as a kid. I often, when I moved back to the US after living in Mexico City, I didn't know how to read in English. I thought everyone was really dumb because clearly they couldn't read like me, like it's a really arrogant little second grader. And then my family moved to Southern California, where I lived for most of my teen years, and to Orange County specifically, which, the ideal in the early aughts was the tall, skinny OC babe with like long blonde hair and, the very Anglo ideal of what a girl should look like. And I have like my big frizzy hair, my big fat Mexican family. And I never felt that my experiences were reflected in the places where I went to escape, which were books, specifically fantasy books. I am a big fantasy reader. I got so into Tolkien when I was about 11 or 12 years old. And actually, this is like the beauty of the child's brain. But when I was 11 or 12, I wrote self-insert Lord of the Rings fan fiction, where I was like a little sister. And here was my logic. So according to Tolkien's lore, we're going to dive deep here, but it's Rings of Power season, so let's. In Tolkien's lore, there are two major groups of elves, and Legolas is from a group of elves called the Mirkwood Elves or the Sylvan Elves, and canonically, they have dark hair. And so I was like, well, obviously they're Latino. I found my people. So it's funny, but I just think it speaks so to how desperate I was to find myself in the pages of a fantasy novel. And so it's I think I just write the books that I needed when I was a kid. And I got into this whole song and dance routine, this circus of publishing, writing young adult fantasy, and I'm hopefully going to be coming back to it soon, but my debut is adult. Accidentally tripped into horror a few years ago and also found that I wanted more representation. I wanted to see and hear, the way that my family interacts with one another on the pages of genre fiction. So very passionate about genre fiction, spec fic, fantasy, sci-fi, horror, with Latinx representation. So that's kind of my jam.
Nice. That's an excellent jam. Priscilla, I'm just going in alphabetical order right now.
Oh, okay, sure. Hola, everyone. I'm Priscilla Oliveras. I write contemporary romance with a Latinx flavor. I'm kind of a mix in the Oliveras house. My papi is Mexican-American, Tejano from San Antonio, born and raised in San Antonio, proud graduate of Burbank High, if there's anybody from San Antonio out there. And Papi joined the Navy, and he was stationed in Puerto Rico, where he met my mom. So my mom was born and raised in Puerto Rico, became a military spouse, and then moved around. So even our house is a blended family, a mix. Caridad talks about code switching. We also like language wise, I found like in my books, like in my debut novel, my mom, mommy reads my books. She started out like just checking the Spanglish. Did I get the accent marks right? Right? And one of her comments on my debut series, the Match to Perfection series, it's 3 sisters that are Puertorriqueñas that live in and around Chicago area. And my mom had noticed like there's always, there's Spanglish in my books, and there was a word that I had used, and mommy put, you can say it like that. And your cousins in San Antonio would say it like that. But remember, in Puerto Rico, we use this word, right? And in our home, we use both of them because we all know what it is, but to be true, what it means, but to be true to my Fernandez sisters who were Puertorriqueñas, I needed to make sure that I used the Puerto Rican word. And I think that's something that we've kind of talked about a little bit, like before we went live, about how, yes, we're all Latinas, but there's those variations, these shades in, whether from Puerto Rico, whether you're Tejano, whether you're Cuban, whether you're from the DR, all of that. And writing wise, I will say I started writing when I was in college. I was a young military spouse, young mom, and I had to take a semester off of school because of a military move. And I did what a lot of readers, what a lot of people say, I like these books. I'm an English major. I like writing. What the heck? I'm going to write a book. How difficult could it be? Something that we all know is actually quite difficult. And my early books, they were bad for a lot of reasons, right? I was learning and growing in craft, but I was doing what I now tell my students to do, and what I still do, because I feel like I'm still learning and growing in craft. I don't think that will ever stop, but I was studying the books that were on my shelves, and the books that like Harlequin was mailing me 4 of them a month, right? I had that subscription. And it was not until I picked up one of Caridad's book and one of Laura Rios's books and one of Berta Plata's books in the Encanto line that Caridad mentioned. And that was the first time I had been reading romances, like a dedicated romance reader for probably 15 years by then. It was the first time I saw a book with characters that looked and sounded like me and my primas and like my big familia, whether from Puerto Rico, whether from San Antonio. And I realized that what was missing in those first books that I wrote was the piece of me that I wanted to see on the page. And reading those books, right or wrong, it kind of gave me like permission to write the stories that I wanted to tell. And for me, it's that moment that I know I personally experienced is, to me, proof of the importance of diversity in the books we read, whether it's Latinx characters, just diversity all across the board. And because I write romance, to me, I feel like a genre that celebrates love and healthy relationships, it is of extreme importance that everyone see themselves or their loved ones depicted on the pages and on the covers of books that celebrate love and hope and the potential. And it was not until, so that was like 1998, 1999, right, Caridad?
And the first ones came out, actually,
Yeah.
It's an anniversary in September of 1999.
Yeah, so it was not until then. And so I started, my next romance was a heroine that was Latina. And that was the first romance of mine that actually finaled in what used to be the Golden Heart. Yes, I know my craft had improved, but I honestly believe it was because I was finally writing the stories that I really wanted to tell, and not just the stories that I believed were all that would sell or were all that would be published. And so my newest books are West Side Love Story. And this one's coming out November 1st. It's Kiss Me Catalina. They're actually both set in San Antonio, my papi's hometown. They're my reimaginings of Shakespeare's. This is obviously Romeo and Juliet, and Kiss Me Catalina is Taming of the Shrew. They all revolve around the Capuleta sisters, adopted sisters who form an all-female mariachi band.
Thank you. You guys have answered like several of my questions already.
Uh-oh.
I have to tell you, if you haven't read Lobizona, please do it right away.
Thank you. So I'm Romina Caridad. Actually, my fiance is from La Habana, Cuba also.
Mira para allá.
Okay.
He came when he was 21 though. So it's a bit of a different experience, which is interesting because so I'm from Argentina, but I came when I was 5. So we had slightly different immigrant experiences when you're like an adult already versus when you're a kid. And so, you know, we often kind of, you know, rib each other a little bit about some of the stuff where, you know, we're different, but it's wonderful because, you know, I had previously been in a long-term relationship with someone who wasn't Latino, who was white. And I guess like being with someone who's also an immigrant also shares your background, but like we were saying, a different flavor, right? Because it's like different terminology, different foods, different everything. Like I haven't eaten any of the foods he eats and vice versa. And so it's like wonderful because even though we do have such a strong foundation of similar culture and language, it really is so different, you know, just so we are so not monolithic, you know, which is lovely. And that gives room for stories like Manu's in Lobizona, you know, who is like, I always like to say, you know, she is not representative of the Argentine immigrant. She is her story, her specific, you know, same as with me, you know, and that's such an important distinction to make. So, you know, I came here at 5. We became citizens when I was like 16. And, you know, it was the same, you know, kind of, everybody's kind of stated it so beautifully already that I don't want to, you know, rehash it. But yes, that idea of you're trying to find your identity reflected back to you anywhere. And I will never forget being like, I don't remember, 10 or 11. And it was like an election year and our teacher made us write about immigrants, about immigration, about whether we thought immigrant was a good or a bad thing. And I read my essay to my mom that night and I had to translate everything because she didn't speak English. And by the end of it, she looked at me and she's like, "You are an immigrant." And I was like, "Huh? What's an immigrant?" Literally after I'd finished writing an entire essay.
Oh, wow. And
that's when I realized I don't see me. I don't see immigrant. I don't understand what that means. I don't realize it's me because like, I wasn't like, I don't think I was like a super dumb kid, like, you know, or whatever, you know, or distracted or anything. I think I was really trying and I was focused, but I wasn't making those human identity level connections that only art really can give us, you know, only seeing ourselves can really give us. And you know, it frustrates me so much that art is the first thing that gets, you know, slashed, just disregarded because this is an identity. Like until, you know, I will never for the rest of my life forget my mother's look in that moment because it was like, I was so used to impressing her. And the way she looked at me was such like pity, but also like, huh, you know, like it was horrible. I will never forget it. And so, so that I wrote Lobizona and it's been a long, long journey to writing the character I wanted to read about at that time, but would have helped me. And to echo, you know, some of this, the timelines that we're giving to publishing, which is kind of an interesting thing we're doing in this intro. You know, I will add to that in 2008, I wrote an ancestor to Lobizona called Yellow Eyes. So as you can tell, it's the same thing. It was just the less clever title. But it was a different story, you know, but it was the same basic Argentine folklore. And I will never forget, you know, I got roundly rejected by agents and was one agent who I really respected, you know, and I don't have to tell you that white, cisgender male, like, you know, and big title, everything says to me, you know, quite frankly, kids in the US don't want to read about Argentine immigrants. They just don't care about the stories. And I was like, do you not realize that I am an Argentine immigrant? Like you're not talking about my story now. Now you crossed a line into like my identity and you're saying my story does not matter. Land, you know, like it's and so that was and it shut me down. I was not published yet. It shut me down. I never again wrote another Latina character. I just wrote like, you know, whatever was expected and fantasy stuff and this and that and other worlds where like it was other races and other, because it broke something in me. And it took until 2017 when what was going on in this country, the horrors that were going on at the border in this country, just brought back so much, you know, and of that moment and of like, wow, I did not fight to say, no, we are worthy. Our story is worthy. I didn't fight. I
Right.
just shut down. And what if I had fought, you know, like, I don't think my story alone would have made a difference, but if a lot of tiny candles flickered on, you know, it does. And so it made me realize, like, we have to stop backing off. We have to fight. And obviously, you know, Lobizona is being challenged and banned all over. So like, you know, it's sad to see that, like, proving that man right, you know, that there's still not a place on the shelf for those stories. But I do think that chats like these, like, help us fight back and say, no, because we hear from
We
the
have to keep talking.
you know, we hear it. Yeah,
Right.
yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yes.
Great. Wow. I have so many questions just from just all the things that you said, but I'm going to go back to what we said about the nomenclature, because it is something that we discussed in terms of titling this program. And I would like to really talk about why is there this discussion going on about Hispanic, Latinx, Latina, Latino, and other possible names for a culture that is so diverse. Isabel, I'm going to start with you. What do you think about this?
So I think we spoke earlier about how we're not a monolith. And I think inclusivity is also something that's really important to me personally. And I think there might be a generational thing too. As a millennial and as somebody who has a lot of friends who are Gen Z, who are queer, who are non-gender conforming, I believe passionately that our terms should be inclusive, and so the people who want to use them will use them, and using them more often, like the they them pronoun in English, and providing one's pronouns in English just makes it more normal, and therefore people aren't automatically outing themselves or othering themselves when they choose to use it for themselves. So I personally like to use Latinx sometimes. I sometimes use Latine with an E at the end, so that in Spanish, you don't have that gender binary of Latino or Latina. I personally am a Latina cisgendered woman. I use Mexican American when I want to be specific. I think depending on what context, I had this conversation with my sister recently, actually, because she was kind of like, what's the deal with Latinx? Like, you know, why would we use this? And I basically said what I just said now. And I think really it just depends on the context you're in. When you're in a room like this, where there is diversity up the wazoo, maybe you will use one of the broader umbrella terms. If you're in a room full of Mexican Americans, maybe you'll say Chicano, maybe you'll say Chicanx, maybe you'll say Latino, maybe you'll say Mexican American. I think it just really depends. And I also, just because I never assume someone's gender identity, I never want to assume like, oh, hey, we're all Latinas here, because, you know, maybe somebody's not. And I think, I don't know, it's something that's really important to me personally. So it's very personal. I personally like to say Latinx Heritage Month because that also encompasses people who are from Latin America who don't speak Spanish. So Hispanic kind of necessarily excludes them. Brazilians, Haitians fall under that banner. So that's me.
Thank you. Is Priscilla?
Can I just say ditto? No. I agree that it's personal. I think it's like, you know, a personal choice. I do think it's generational, you know, as well. For me, personally, whether it's this term or we're talking about something else, I personally want to be more, you know, more welcoming, more inclusive. Don't want anybody to ever feel like they're left out or they're on the outside. So I agree, like that switching, trying to use more they and them when I'm not sure what, you know, how someone identifies or how a group might, you know, more people in the group might identify. So to me, I mean, my tagline is contemporary romance with a Latinx flavor. That's what's on any of my swag that, you know, come to my signing and I'll give you a jar opener and that's what it's going to say, right, with my website. Again, because for me, that's important to not have to not feel like I'm doing something I will be honest, like with my books, my first series, the Spanish is italicized because in my mind, what I was thinking was, You know, if you listen to the audio, the narrator, you know, goes back and forth, habla español, then she speaks English, like, right? She can flow back and forth and the reader can hear it. And I thought, well, I want, if the reader's reading my book, I want them to, what cue can I give them to make sure that they're kind of hearing it and in Spanish in their head. However, as I started, you know, as I became a published author and then started really talking with more and doing more research, there is a strong contingent that feels that italicizing Spanish is another form of othering. And for me, it's important. Yes, I'm writing for any romance reader, or if you're a non-romance reader and you want to try one, sure, try mine, thanks. Right? But so all readers, but I would be disingenuous if I didn't say, like, if I have to picture a reader after my parents and, you know, my loved ones, if I'm just picturing I am thinking of the young girl at the Texas Book Festival that came to my signing and had Rosa's book, her Perfect Affair, and like leaned over the table to get closer to me, to share like how much it meant to her to read my debut, His Perfect Partner, and to see people like her and her sisters, you know, depicted. But so to me, if I'm italicizing the Spanish because I want a non-speaker to hear it in Spanish, but that reader feels othered, that I don't want that. So my newer books don't have it italicized, because so for me, using Latinx or using they, them, or it's all about me, for me, it's important to welcome others into, you know, whatever I'm doing, this space or my books or, you know, anything else.
Thank you. Romina?
Yeah, I piggybacking on that, I didn't italicize the Spanish in Lobizona. And I did get a little bit of, you know, resistance on like certain terms like mate, you know, Argentines drink mate, and it's like a tea that's like in a calabaza gourd with like a sifter spoon for anybody who's is not familiar, and like you know, strain it. And they were like, well, people are gonna read it as mate. And I was like,
Yeah.
don't care, frankly. I don't care if they read it as mate, because then they'll have to figure it out. How many of us have to come to a new country where we don't speak the language, the culture, and we figure it out through context?
Yeah.
What better way to figure things out to context than in the hands of an author who's gonna like take care of you, you know? So
Right.
I've actually gotten flack from readers who don't speak Spanish, who've been pissed at the amount of Spanish in this, and that sometimes it's not translated. And they've been like, and I laugh when I see like, you know, the long kind of like, and, you know, I felt very like insecure. Like I didn't know what was being said. And I had to like try to figure it out. And I'm like, okay, so stop. Think about like how the protagonist of the story feels about everything. And think about, maybe I wanted to give you a little bit of that discomfort to make you, you know, it's a first person present, you know, like to make you really feel that but it is funny, that entitlement that some readers come to the book because frankly, they've come to expect it, because that's what the industry has fed them, you know, so they have had to fend for themselves and hunt through these like literary jungles, you know, so for meaning. So, and as far as the term, like I was saying before to Caridad when we started, like, I don't know which is my personal favorite, but like, I think like my big thing is I'm happy people are designing their own terms, because I hate labels with such a passion. And probably Lobizona, that's what everybody says. I came away from this being like, this was a treatise on labels, pretty much. I'm like, yes, exactly. On the label illegal, but really on a lot of labels, you know? And so I like just feel like if you're comfortable with a way to define yourself, why should anybody else take it from you? You know what I mean? So I really feel like whatever someone feels comfortable with, I would echo what everybody said, is totally fine, you know, as long as, like we said, we're not excluding anyone or being like, well, you don't get to fit in this banner, like that's problematic. So like you guys were saying, the most inclusive banner. Yes, I agree.
Caridad?
I guess, you know, I'm going to be not necessarily the odd man out in terms of wanting inclusivity, because I think it's very important that everyone feel that they can be a part of, I think, this experiment that's that we call America, which is a huge melting pot of cultures that have brought so many wonderful things to this country. But as I mentioned, I have a problem with Latinx in that X is a very not common letter in the Spanish language. And I mean, a very large group of Hispanics. I mean, I think the polls show that, or Latinos, whatever we want to call ourselves, really don't like that term. It's like 94%. And so I don't use it because I don't want to alienate that 94% of Latinos who see that as being something that's being forced on them by a certain sector. And I'd rather that, like Romina and everybody else said, that people picked a term that they were comfortable with. And I like the idea, we were talking about this, the Latina with an E, which is much more common in the language, sounds much more natural when people say it. But again, I think it's your own private choice as to, how you wish to identify, and not have somebody force a label on you that you're not comfortable with. And it's something, to be honest, when we talk about inclusivity, as I said, I was lucky to be part of that first group of novels that Priscilla said opened her eyes to the fact that in publishing there was a place for diverse books. And I have to say that over the years, my experience has been that many of the publishers who I worked with were very open to stories that had diverse characters. For example, after that line folded in 2001, it took me about another 3 years to actually sell another book. And I sold it to, of all people, Harlequin, and it was a female Latina FBI agent. It was a very unusual story. It was a paranormal when they weren't publishing paranormals,
Wow.
and they never hesitated. And the most rewarding thing was having Harlequin readers who, up until then, really had not experienced diverse characters, really, except for, the Latin lover stereotypes kind of in some of the Presents books, respond and say, wow, it was so nice to have this different heroine. And to date, that's one of my best-selling books, because and people really responded to the fact that this was a different character. Not only that, the breaking of the mold of having the hero who was the law enforcement character. It was the heroine who was the one who was kick-ass and really, I won't ruin the book, but there's a twist at the end. And so, over the years, there have been so many opportunities, and for the most part, a lot of them have been where I'm writing diverse characters. But the other thing that I don't want us to foreclose is us doing books that don't have Latinas, because at the end of the day, we're writers. And I remember, Priscilla, you might have been at the Chica Lit conference where somebody asked the question, would you ever write a book that didn't have a Latina? And I said, not only would I have, and somebody got up and walked out of the audience. And to me, it's like we're writers. I love that we're writing diverse things, but I also want to say to people who are out there who are Latinos and don't know what their place is and aren't sure, it's just write what's in your heart, like Priscilla did. And no matter what it is, it'll resonate with readers. It's the passion you put into the stories that's most important. And if you feel that passion involves a diverse character, great, go for it, because I truly believe there are places in publishing for that, especially now after so many years of chipping away at the wall that kept us out of publishing. And if it isn't, that's fine too. Just follow your heart in terms of what you're putting on the page.
Yeah, definitely.
So Sue asked a question, which actually relates to my next question as well, is she'd like to hear your reflections on the TV series Jane the Virgin, in which Jane struggles to be recognized as a writer of romance as opposed to more high concept fiction. And as a romance reader, this is like catnip to me, because I want to know, and not just romance, but like, does your heritage have anything to do with what was available to you to write when you started writing, keeping in mind, Caridad, what you had said about, you're a writer, you write everything, but like I'm being Indian, I was just like, so thrilled to see Indian romance. And I was just like, oh, nobody ever writes sex scenes of Indians. And then you hear the parents being like, oh, you know, so I was just kind of wondering if there was any pressure for you to write in certain ways or certain genres or subgenres because of your heritage. And then of course, how, your thoughts on Jane the Virgin and writing romance. So I'm going to start with Priscilla.
Well, I would say it's not just Jane who struggles with that romance. Like for how long ago, there used to be like the book covers, right? Like you didn't want people to see what you were reading. I think romance is kind of like that, like that redheaded stepchild, right? Or whatever you want to use, like belittled as a romance. I could like totally get on a soapbox here about how underappreciated romance is. So I will try really hard not to. But for a long time, romance has been like the bestseller in mass market. It's, but I honestly feel that it's, it has to deal with like for so long in publishing, it's that white cisgendered male, like the patriarchy, and romance has predominantly, it's growing. Yes, there are more male readers and it's more diverse, but it has been predominantly like written by women for women. It's a place where, women, especially in today's romance, as it has changed, as our genre has changed, it's not all, you still see like the old bodice rippers. I think with the advent of self-publishing, the beauty of the romance genre is if there's something you want to read, you're going to find it out there, right? But predominantly today's romance is about what I believe, healthy relationships, strong female characters, right? So it's no longer the little virgin that needs to be saved by this man, right? She might be saving him, or they might be saving each other, or hell, neither one of them needs to be saved. But they, together, they at the end of the book, they are strong characters capable of being on their own, but they make each other, like they improve, they're happy, right? And so there's no I feel like in a genre where women are sexually active and where women, it's you're talking about getting pleasure in any kind of way, whether it doesn't have to be sexual, but in life and pursuing her dreams. For whatever reason, society has like denigrates that genre. I think just like we've been talking about how the improving diversity and how the genre, our genre, and really publishing is heeding that call for diversity. We're also, heeding the call of within the romance genre of, the way society's changed. You hear now talk about in books, there is a mention in somehow about contraception and saying no and consent and all those things. It's important that you would not have heard about before. So I guess in a nutshell, that I think the answer to Sue's question would be like, for too long, the patriarchy has been in charge and the gatekeepers. And thankfully, we're seeing more and more an end to that.
Mm-hmm. Romina?
Yeah, I love how you put that. I completely agree with that. And I would add, as far as like what you were saying about being put in a box or not. I find that, and I guess it's because I'm Latina and this is about a Latina character, but people are constantly classifying Lobizona as magical realism. And, I'm talking even like major trades and starred reviews that say magical realism. And so I was like, do I use this quote or not? Like that. Like I'm talking educated industry people who should know better. I mean, I know that magical realism eludes a lot of it's complicated, and I'm not an expert. Like I'm someone who loves to learn about it, but like I did not write a magical realism book. And so, that is something that I think we come up against a lot, where it's like, we try to write something and it's like, oh, you're Latino. It's a Latino, oh, magical realism, just stay on, move on. And we're not allowed more nuance. Sometimes it feels like, I don't feel qualified enough to talk on the Jane the Virgin stuff, by the way. I'm too embarrassed. I'm like not good at this, so I'll let someone else take that.
Well, Caridad put in here, and I was hoping that you would talk about it, Caridad. So I don't know if you want to share that, Caridad.
Yeah, that was very exciting. We had gotten a call one day from the showrunners because they decided at the very last minute that if Jane was going to have a book published, they were going to actually publish a book that she supposedly wrote. And so my agent got a call, and 3 days later, I had started writing a book. It had to be written in a month, which was quite an undertaking. But it was very exciting because I think Jane the Virgin on television broke a lot of molds. Again, you know, we see Latinas, we see them being everyday people. I always thought it was kind of weird that being set in Miami, there wasn't, it was a Cuban thing, but she wasn't Cuban, which was kind of interesting. But you know, there was a lot of stereotypes being broken in terms of all the different characters, their life experiences. They did use magical realism, which was problematic when we were writing the book, because in fact the book was historical, and you know, a lot of the magical realism gimmicks on the show were done with visual and technical modern things, and so we had to incorporate that. But I thought it was an absolutely wonderful show that really kind of got a lot of people who wouldn't normally watch that show because of the unique premise, because of the whole thing being like an over-the-top telenovela that I think Latinas, and more so than, you know, than males, are used to that. You know, my grandmother would watch the telenovelas, my mother would watch, and so it was part of our natural part of culture. That they exposed other people to, the same way that, for example, K-drama now is exposing so many people to, again, they're just telenovelas, but you know, in Korean, that are exposing people to different cultures. And I think that's the wonderful thing about what we're all doing, is that we're exposing people to different cultures through things like our books and shows like Jane the Virgin. And the most, I think, rewarding thing for me is hearing from people saying, you know, I know that we're different, and yet when I read your book, like The Family She Never Met, there were so many things there that I could identify with, even though I'm Polish or this, or there's an Italian family, a very similar immigrant experience. So, you know, it was a very unique opportunity. And just absolutely amazing to work with the showrunners and have them, you know, actually I said my name on the program at one point. And yeah, but again, you know, I think it shows, like I mentioned, that there is a lot of more inclusivity there in so many arenas. And I just, you know, wish that when I look at mainstream television, though, I still don't see that. When I look at the cable programs, I still don't see that. And so I think publishing is making the inroads first. And I think romance made that. You know, we're talking about romance. It's constantly being put down. It's fantasies. And I hate to say the book that won't be mentioned, it's porn, right? It created such a bad perception of something that we had tried so hard to change, to make people realize it's not just about the sex in the books. It's about partnerships, about people coming together and respecting each other. And I think that's what modern romance, as Priscilla so aptly said, that's what modern romance is about. It's about women in new roles, exploring what they want and finding partners who respect that. Respect their choices and are supportive of what they're doing. And that's what modern romance is. And I when people say, oh, but women, you know, they think that this is what their heroes are going to be like, their husbands and their boyfriends, they read this and it's unrealistic. And to me, it's kind of like, so, but when somebody reads James Bond or, you know, an Ian Fleming book, you don't think that the man is going to believe that that's what life should be like, right? I mean, it's such a chauvinistic attitude to think that women can't separate, you know, that escapism,
Fantasy
and
from
fantasy from reality. And I think, it's just, it is such a chauvinistic thing. And sadly, it's not limited to men, because I can't tell you how many times I'm in a bookstore and somebody says, oh, I don't read that trash, you know, or they ask me, well, when are you going to write a real book? I've written 70. I think one of them had to have been real along the way, right? So it's very frustrating because they treat you, even publishing, as a second-class citizen. If we look at the advances that women get in romance, it's generally far lower than a male would get for a book. So I think,
Can I interrupt for ask one thing? Do you think that that's even more so for somebody writing from the Latin perspective or the Hispanic perspective?
Or diverse.
diversity.
No.
Or I would say, well, are you asking if an Anglo author advance would be more than a Latinx or diverse advance? Is that what you're asking?
I'm thinking more about the respect part of it. Like,
okay.
there's like, there's already a sort of disrespect for these genres, like mystery, if it's not mystery thriller or literary fiction, there's already like a little bit of so if you're a diverse author, is there even less respect because you're writing a diverse character and story?
I don't feel like, I don't think I've had like disrespect. If anything, I have had like a reader, I was on a panel at a book festival, and I had it, and they didn't say it in a rude way. I think it was for this person an honest question, but it was, if they are not Latinx, were they going to be able to relate to my book, like to the people in my book? Frankly, like the short answer is,
oh, I couldn't relate to the characters.
Right. And frankly, like tongue in cheek is, if you can relate to a vampire or a shapeshifter, I think you can relate to my Latinx characters, right? But at its heart, my response is it's a romance, and being Latinx is part of who they are, but it's not all of who they are. And to me, to a point kind of that Caridad made a little while ago, what my hope is with my books is, if you're Latinx, because like if you read this, that they're Mexican American, and so there's not really much Puerto Rican, right, from Puerto Rico in my Queens of Mariachi series. But my hope is, if you're Latinx and you read it, you feel a little bit like you spent some time with someone under our big Latinx umbrella. But if you're not, I hope you read it and you enjoy the experience of that cultural thread, right? That you finish feeling like you've made new friends, that hopefully goes on your keeper shelf and you want to, revisit them again and reread it, but that you have at least gotten a little bit of an appreciation for their culture. But really, like what you had said, Caridad, earlier, is yes, I think you will find that we have more in common than we have differences, right? So yes, you'll learn a little bit, you'll get to experience a little bit about the different cultures in all of our books, but to me, that's helping all of us like to expand our knowledge, to expand our appreciation of all the other, the differences that are among us.
Isabel, I want to know why you had such a strong reaction to when Romina said magical realism.
Okay, so for those of you who don't know in the audience, The Hacienda is a Gothic horror novel. It's about a young woman in 19th century Mexico who makes an advantageous marriage to a handsome widower whose first wife died mysteriously, moves to his hacienda in the middle of the remote countryside, and soon discovers, after her husband leaves to go back to the capital, that it is deeply haunted. And so she needs an exorcism. And so she goes into town to seek the help of a local priest, who it turns out moonlights as a witch. There are no magical realism elements in this book. It's horror. There is some fantasy in that there is witchcraft in this book. It has many aspects of historical. There's a romance subplot. It is forbidden romance. So if you're into Fleabag season 2, this might be your catnip. But I just was, when I began writing, I felt very pressured to write literary fiction and magical realism because of experiences I had in my education, where literary fiction especially was held on this great pedestal as the only kind of writing that was really worth anything. So I thought, okay, fine, I'll try it. Hated it. I can't. It's not my DNA. So when I finally pivoted and found myself in fantasy, I became a writer, the writer I was meant to be. And it's just where I find, and in genre fiction more generally, is where I find the most joy as a writer. And it's where I am my full self. And like Caridad said, the passion really shines through and resonates in the work. My experience with the Hacienda, going out into the world and being called magical realism, unfortunately did not surprise me, because I was always very wary moving in genre fiction spaces where people wrote fantasy and sci-fi, that as usually the only Latina in the room, they would assume I wrote magical realism, or they would call my writing magical realism, where I'm like, nah, bro, this is straight up fantasy. Like it's fantasy, period. So I have pushed so hard against it. It is so hard to hold my tongue. Reviews are for readers and definitely not for writers, but when one like pops up on my radar somehow, or my publicist unwittingly like sends one my way in a roundup of articles that my book has appeared in, I get very frustrated because my heritage has impacted my ability to break into publishing deeply. I was often very frustrated by how much of an easier time my white peers had compared to me and other BIPOC writers when I was a member of a Pitch Wars class. So it's a now defunct, unfortunately, mentorship program. So I had like kind of a graduating class, and watching some writers just soar, and their books that, perhaps they were good, perhaps they were stunning, perhaps they were kind of middle of the road, just skyrocket off, get like very shiny, flashy deals, get flashy agents, whatever. And me and the other writers with marginalized backgrounds had to work so much harder to break in. My first novel the one that got me my agent, did not have Latinx characters, did not have Mexican characters. And my agent was very passionate about it, but we received so many rejections that were coded. And we actually got one in the end we received a very lowball offer on this novel from one Big Five publisher. And the editor said, when she refused to negotiate anything higher, she said, why doesn't Isabel write something Mexican? And I was like, well, okay, F you, let me do that. So I turned around and I wrote a book that I poured my heart into. We sent it back to her and it was too Mexican. It was just
oh my God.
I spent.
What is too Mexican? That kills me.
You cannot freaking win. So and that was actually, it was after a few more rejections after that, but my experience of just like round the clock rejection with that book, that was the most Mexican thing I had ever freaking written, that I'd really been vulnerable in writing, that really scared me to write because I had never written a Mexican American main character. And so it was really a book with great growth and a book that I was really passionate about. Getting so many rejections actually led me to write The Hacienda, because I was like, well, fine, I can't please you. I'm just going to write what I want to read, which right now, happens to be a horror novel set in in Mexico in the 1820s after its War of Independence. And I want to write a haunted house, and I want it to be gothic as fuck. And that's what I'm going to do. So I found that my heritage really boxed me in, and I have had to fight. I had to fight pretty hard. And I think a lot of other people have experienced this as well. Sylvia Moreno Garcia, she of Mexican Gothic fame. When I finally gave in to my rage, and I had a little subtweet about like, hey, by the way, my book is not magical realism. And she retweeted it saying like, basically, welcome to the club. Her work gets called magical realism all the time. And it is not. Yeah. So I reacted so emphatically when Romina brought up magical realism, because I was like, wait, dude.
But what's interesting that you're saying is what I alluded to about writing what your passion is. Because when I first started writing, there was no Latino publishing. It was groundbreaking. But then afterwards, when that failed, right, it was like, okay, I'm just going to keep on writing. I'm going to keep on writing whatever. And up until recently, when there's this huge push for diversity, Caridad could write whatever Caridad wanted. But now that there's this huge push, which is both good and bad, and this experience says, Caridad, you have to write a diverse book. But why, if that's not what I want to write right now?
I feel
and
that
so
too.
there's good stuff happening with it, but then there's the blowback of, if they see a name that they don't understand and they realize is Latino, they figure that's what you have to write.
I know we will have made it when we are allowed to write whatever we want to write, just like
I agree.
That will be the day. Until such a time, it's a tricky business. There's a lot of weird push and pull. It's like, well, yeah, I do want to write historical novels set in Mexico or what is now South Texas, featuring people who are a lot like my family. But what if I don't want to in the future? What if what if I
Yeah,
don't? And then
I'll
I
say, to be
prefer-
honest, like my books, they like this because they're series, they usually revolve around like one Latinx family, right? So like this one, the Capuleta sisters, my Key West series, it's the Navarro familia, they're firefighter paramedics. And so that family, that the one that you're going to see and all, is Latinx, like, because like I'm wanting to write like families, you know, that I can really relate to, that are like mine, but not all of my books is the love interest Latinx. And I did one time, like I had my vision board for his perfect partner. Jeremy is Anglo, and I had it on our dining room table, and one of my amigas came by and she was like, "Who's this blonde guy?" And I said, "Oh, that's Jeremy, he's here." And she's like, "Oh, why is he white?" And that took me back, you know, but I realized, well, that's how Jeremy came to me. So I'm trying really hard. You know, I'm writing the characters as they appear, right? And as they, and that's just how it's going to be. Thankfully, I haven't had an editor say, "Well, no, how come they're both not Latinx?" Right? They're just, and that's what I will, for me, that's my plan. I don't want, we have enough roadblocks that other people are throwing away. Like when it comes to creativity, I'm going to write the stories and the people that, you know, that resonate, that come dancing or running or whatever it is that they're doing, right, when they show up in my head, because those are the people that are speaking to me. I don't live in an all white world. I don't live in an all Latinx world, right? And I'm writing contemporary romance. I'm not on a sci-fi, like on a planet or whatever, right? So I'm writing the world and the stories that as a reader, I want to get lost in. And so woe is the person that when I submit a book and they tell me, "Oh, how come they're both not, you know, Mexican or whatever," I'm going to be, because they're just not. And that would be a sign for me that that's not the right place for my book to be.
Mhm.
And what if the day came that you weren't going to include any Latinos? What do you think the response would be with a name like Priscilla Oliveras?
I don't know, but I'll be honest with you right now. The stories that I want to tell are stories that you know, that are about our culture, because I haven't seen them. I'm thinking about, you know,
Thank you.
those are the books that I want on the shelf. It's important to me that we have representation that you know, up there. So I'm not going to say that I never will, but right now, like all of the stories and all the irons that I have in the fire that I can't talk about, right, are, you know, Latinx.
I'm gonna, we're just about 8 o'clock and I want to make sure I get to this question from Alicia. And then I have one more question before we go. She says, "I literally cried the first time I saw my culture represented authentically in a book, Argentina, ever. And I will never forget that feeling. Thank you, Romina, for that. And thank you for all of you for putting your work out there. My question is, I'm curious how you all arrive at your work. Do you see the characters first or work around an idea?" I'm going to start with Romina for this, since I think that's where I am in this.
Thank you, Alicia. Thanks for that shout out. That feels awesome. So this could be a very long, and I think we all have the potential to talk a lot about this. Is our favorite thing to talk about, but it's like, I will keep it super brief for everyone's sake. I tend to begin with an idea. So that usually comes to me. And when it goes to construction, just to give you a little more, like I tend to begin always with place. So once I have the idea and the concept loosely of what I want to write, I develop the location. And so once I know the universe that this, you know, and kind of understand it really well, like the governance, the spirituality, like what is it? Where is this place? How does it work? Like, how does it function? I know what my character's being born into, then I start with character. So I begin with world and then character and then plot. So
I like
I'm a Virgo, and it feels very like erotic Virgo. Follow me down this rabbit hole.
Wow. That's the first time I've heard that. I've always heard character first. So that's really interesting. Caridad?
I usually start with a character, and it's weird because it's almost always the female character who comes to me, and I kind of get an impression of what she's like and what she's doing, and then craft the story. But I also have situations where I'm asked to, like the Jane the Virgin thing, to work on a project where the story's already laid out and the characters are already laid out and I'm writing the story. So that's a very different process, because then I've got to put my stamp and my voice and my feelings to something that's already kind of laid out. But I really like when a character comes alive and I have to craft a story around, usually again around her. I write very female centric stories, in that, you know, I want them to be the ones that end up shining at the end and find somebody who's going to respect them and support them. And that's basically the process. After I get that character and a strong idea of what she is and what she wants to accomplish in life, then I craft the story around her.
Awesome. Isabel, I have to tell you that we cannot keep the hacienda in the library. It's always out.
Ooh,
Oh, that
nice.
brings me so much joy. So the hacienda is actually a perfect example of how I am a very vibes forward author as a Scorpio. I'm like, what I want? And for this one, it was like, I want something spooky. I really wanted atmosphere. When it comes to where the ideas come from, it is like a constellation of vibes. Like, I know I want a guy who's kind of like this, but it's very undefined. And I want a space that's going to be kind of like this. Like, we want a big old creaky house with cold corners. And these pieces start to come together slowly, and they crystallize into an idea. And then, Romina, I feel like we could talk for ages about like very planning. Then the real world work begins of me like going through like really Rube Goldberg type steps for me to get to my final book. But like, for example, one of my yet to be announced projects on the horizon came to me in a dream. I had a nightmare about very on brand for me, a creaky old haunted house, and there was this ghost. So I ended up playing with the ghost. I woke up out of that dream and I was like, so that ghost was totally my boyfriend. I met his family. It ended up being really nice, but I was so scared at the beginning. So that ended up being like the seed of the dream. Did not have logic, but the vibes of the idea was something I wanted to chase. So usually that's how it happens. Like just a little snatch of an idea when I'm reading something else, or I'm like on a run in the park, just little baby things, and I write them all down. I'm so meticulous, never letting one of these things flit away into the ether. I'm like, no, come here, sit down, you're getting committed to paper, and then eventually I'll come back to you. So that's how it all starts for me.
That's good advice about like keeping notes. Like I have notes on my phone, or
An evangelist about notes.
Yeah.
Always keep a book.
Mine is mostly character. There's only one, my Keys to Love series, that was set in Key West. And that was just, I grew up junior high, high school, and early college years when I would go home was Key West. And so I knew I always wanted to set a series there. So my Keys to Love series, it started with setting, but then I right away moved to character. Okay, who is it? And the Navajo Familia came to me. They're all firefighter paramedics. But my debut series, The Match to Perfection, it was Yasmin, the oldest sister, book one. She's a Broadway dancer. Like she just kind of showed up. And as I start talking to her, then I, oh, you've got two sisters, oh, right. And my Queens of Mariachi series, that the idea came to me several years ago. Sabrina Soul, she's also Annette Chavez Macias, her women's fiction debut, Big Chicas Don't Cry, just released. I totally recommend that. But Sabrina/Annette sent me a text message and she said, hey, Pris, I saw this online and I immediately thought of you. And it was a link to an interview with an all-female mariachi band in California. It was just like 2.5-minute interview on a local TV station. But before it was over, I was like, oh my gosh, I have some sisters. Like I know that but because my papi's from San Antonio, I knew if I'm writing mariachis, I'm writing it in like the city that I know and love. Right. So these girls are going to be from San Antonio. And then for me, it snowballs from there. Okay. So it's a group of sisters. I had done blood family with the Navarros and with the Fernandez. So I wanted to explore the idea of found family. And so I did a lot of research into adoption and calling DFAS in San Antonio to get information and could this happen and all of that. But it all just kind of snowballed. Okay, so they're in a mariachi band, like what could be happening? Maybe they enter a competition because they want some money to help, like with their parents. Oh yeah, they have a community center, and then, right, you need to have conflict. So I was like, okay, so yeah, all the other bands want to beat them, but how can I make it personal? Maybe there's another band and there's a family and there's some bad blood. And then it was like, oh my gosh, like feuding families, like Romeo and Juliet, right? And then it just kind of snowballs, snowballed from there. But it's all about, for me, 99% of the books that are on my keeper shelf are there because of the characters, because I want to go visit them again. I've either like Hot Target, Suzanne Brockman, I want to spend some time with Cosmo. So I might be dusting in that room, come back an hour later, I'm no longer dusting, I'm sitting on the floor, and now I'm just reading a chapter to visit Cosmo, right? That's what I want. I hope my books are on a reader shelf and they're cleaning on a Saturday morning and they got that cleaning music going, but all of a sudden they're reading my book because, oh wait, I gotta just touch base with them. So it's all about the people and feeling like you've met new friends.
Well, Priscilla, we're gonna have to have a long talk about Cosmo at some point.
Oh my gosh,
I have
he's
thought.
mine. He's my book boyfriend. Sorry, you can't have him.
Okay, I'm a Prince Joe guy. I'm a Prince Joe woman.
Ooh.
Anyways, so my last question to you is to recommend a book or author by somebody who's not on this panel of Hispanic background. Caridad?
I would definitely recommend my friend Julia Monte, who has a number of books. She is of Argentinian descent. There isn't one that isn't a fabulous book. She really comes across with the culture and the emotion. And she has a couple that are all related in the wine country. So I would definitely tell you to check her out.
Awesome, I will. Isabel?
So I'm going to go for, I feel like there are lots of cool debuts that are coming out in 2023 and 2024 that I'm starting to hear about that I'm very excited about, but I want to reach back a few years to a book called Itza, Itza, by Rios de la Luz, which is a book about witches. She's a Mexican-American writer, and it's a book that delves into, so trigger warnings, trauma, water magic, witchcraft, families, women's relationships. It's a very grounding book if you are of Mexican descent. It was one of those books where I read it and I was like, oh my God, I wanted to cry because I was like, I don't just feel seen, I feel known. So it's called Itza, Itza by Rios de la Luz. Really, really good.
Awesome. I'm writing these down. Priscilla?
Okay, I think I lost and then I came back in, so I don't know if I disappeared for a second, but for me, I would say if you're looking for romance, if you're on social media, follow the hashtag Latinx Rom, ROM, and there are quite a few of us Latinx romance authors who will use that. So I already mentioned Sabrina Sol, who's AKA Annette Chavez Macias. Her most recent is Big Chicas Don't Cry, but I would say Alexis Daria, her most recent series, The Primas of Power, right? So a lot like Adios and You Had Me at Hola. Mia Sosa, I think she's like a queen of rom-com. Mia has like studied rom-com beats, like rom-com films. And I think she like knows how to hit every mark. That's The Wedding Crasher and The Worst Best Man. Adriana Herrera writes LGBTQ plus and, male, female contemporary romance. Her Dreamer series is amazing. She's got a new one that's coming out in October. It's called On the Hustle. But she also, her first historical romance, Caribbean Heiress in Paris, came out in June, and it is the first book in a 3-book series. She's working on book 2's coming out next year, but it is the women come from the DR and they are in a Caribbean Heiress in Paris, takes place during the World Expo in Paris. That it's just beautiful. She does a wonderful job of weaving in like cultural history, right? And like Spanish composers, like they're at a ball, but they're talking about, like Spanish composers and music, and it's sexy and it's rich with culture. So I think any of those I mean, I could keep going. If you really want more Latinx rom recommendations, hit me up on social media and I can give you a whole list.
I wrote everything down. Romina?
So I'm gonna pitch two books I just blurbed actually that came out
Yay.
this year. So one is Together We Burn by Isabel Cañas, and
Ooh.
it's kind of a Spanish world where it's like dancing and dragons, and it's a fantasy, but it's a really cool and different and fun and very colorful. And my favorite thing was just so many descriptions of food, which and she does such a great job with food stuff. And then Aiden Thomas, the Sun Bearer Trials. I just blurred this one, and I was so happy to get it early because I was like, this is going to be one of my most anticipated reads, and then you get it early, so it's like a treat. And it's Mexican inspired, semi-dioses competing. You know, that's my favorite kind of thing. Anything like that with a competition and everything, and such like deep personal identity messaging, which like Aiden pulls off just like beautifully. So definitely very, very heartfelt.
At the top of my TBR after I hit my deadline on Thursday.
You're gonna love it.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, my TBR pile is going to just fall over now because I've just added all of those books to it. Although I have, yes, I'm good with some of those. So anyways, thank you so much for being here today. I have learned so much, and I really appreciated all of your honest and thoughtful responses to our questions. And we have so many books to read. I'm very excited about all of this.
Thank you so much for getting us all together.
Yes,
Thanks to
thank you so much for
thanks to
hosting
everyone who
us.
came.
This was really lovely.
It's been so fun, and I think our audience has really enjoyed it. So thank you everybody for being here. Remember, you can buy signed books from Bank Square Books, and I will send out a link afterwards so that you can watch us again or buy our books. Ours, not mine. Awesome. I love it. And thank you again, authors, for being here. It's been a pleasure to talk with you and learn a little bit more about you.
Can we get a screenshot of us real fast if everybody wants to hold up their books?
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Sure. How do we do that?
Let me see if I can. I'm gonna see if I can do it with that. It takes 3 fingers. So let me see if I can. Oh man. Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3. Okay, I think I got one. Yes.
Awesome. Send that to me. Anyways, thank you. Yeah, this is great. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great night. And Priscilla, have a wonderful dinner.
Yeah.
Oh, thank
your
you.
travels.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Adios.
Thank you.